So, welcome to Hebrew. This is a marvelous opportunity to learn a new language with new letters in a different way. And I know that some of you in this group have studied Hebrew before. Little bits here, little bits there. I've been studying Hebrew, little bits here and little bits there, probably for 35 years maybe. And I'm Joanie Adkins. And I just like it. So I decided, why not learn a little bit more of it? So I've done things like I took a class with a man from Deal Island, and he did basically what I'm doing with you today. He just took a book and started teaching me little bits here and there. And then we had a lot of fun with that. We had about 25 people in the class, and then he offered another class, and I did that one, and that was fun too. And then I had an opportunity to meet a young couple from Israel who were studying at UMES. And they were here in America going to school, and I had an opportunity to meet them. And then they had a baby at the same time we had a baby, and so we kind of got to be good friends. And even when they moved back to Israel, when they were done their studies here, they went back to Israel, and we stayed in touch. So with them, I studied some script Hebrew, which was even more fun and interesting. And then I took about a 17-year hiatus when I didn't look at it at all, didn't think about it much at all because I was busy raising kids and doing other things. And then my oldest son, it came time for him to study a foreign language in high school, and he said, I think I'd like to do Hebrew. And I said, hot diggity dog. So we got out a book called Learning Hebrew in 10 Minutes a Day, and he enjoyed doing that. We ended up doing a class with the rabbi's wife in Salisbury. And she was just amazed that Gentiles wanted to learn something of Hebrew. She welcomed us to her home, and we went there for lessons for quite a while with my two younger children as well. So I've played around with Hebrew for lots and lots and lots of years, and there's never been a time that it didn't fascinate me and interest me. I've taught several other classes, and it's always interested people there as well. I do tell you that you're probably never going to become a fluent speaker or writer of Hebrew just studying with me, because I don't have enough knowledge to take you there. But what I can do is introduce you to Hebrew. I can tell you how to say the letters. We can discover some interesting things about those letters. We can discover some interesting things about the language. We can enjoy our time of playing around with it, and we'll decide if you want to go deeper and further, then there'll be plenty of opportunities to do that. There's a website called Hebrew and the number 4 Christians that has so much information it'll take you 14 lifetimes to read everything they have on their website, I think. They have a manual. I think you can just purchase the manual, but maybe you just print the pages off, but it's a huge amount of material. But there's lots and lots and lots of stuff there that you can print. There's lots of things online on YouTube and websites that you can learn the letters. And there will always be a little bit of variety in that how someone says the name of the letter or how they pronounce it or some rule that they give. I always defer to people who know more than I do. One book that I really, really like is the book that we're going to use here that's called Time to Read Hebrew. And Gail, may I borrow your book a second? I'll just hold it up here a second. This is volume 1 of Time to Read Hebrew. And this is a book that's written specifically to a 3rd grade audience. And I like to tell people we start at a 3rd grade level because little children who are first beginning to master language about in 3rd grade is when they're ready to take on the idea of another language. All right, so let's, I know what we did. We looked at the front of the book, Time to Read Hebrew. And that book is available on Amazon. It's, I think, $13.95, I think something like that. There is a book 1 and a book 2 because by the time you finish book 1, you have not yet learned all the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So if you start, it's wise to plan to go all the way through book 1 and book 2. It is not a book that you can do independent of a teacher. You might be able to figure out how to fill in the pages, but you really need, as you do in any foreign language, you need to have someone hear you speak so that you can get pronunciation and accent correct. And by accent, I mean stress on syllables. I like to make fun and say, get your accent on the right syllable, because it just makes it funny. And in Hebrew, our accent on the correct syllable is usually not at the beginning of the word, which is the syllable, like in English. So I'll frequently say to you when we're practicing reading that you need to get your accent on the correct syllable. That might be on the second syllable or the third syllable, and so we play around with that. And as you get familiar with a word, you maybe learn how to put that accent on the right place. But frequently, the accent is not on the first beginning of a word. All right, so if you will look in your book, on page 2 is our first page of Hebrew. And the amazing thing is that in one lesson, you can actually be reading Hebrew, okay? So the part at the bottom of the page that's kind of yellow, that tells a story, and it's sort of fun to read, but I don't focus on that. That sort of puts us into a cultural mindset. It gives you some practice of alternating back and forth, which I find a little bit confusing to go to be reading English, and suddenly we're reading Hebrew, and then we're reading English again. I find that a little bit confusing, but you are welcome to look at it. And as we go through the book more, the yellow mark at the bottom of each lesson takes on more meaning, and it'll have more meaning to you. But it's usually describing rabbinical Judaism, or the use of a symbol or a part of Judaistic life that is not necessarily biblical, and it's not necessarily Torah-bound, but it's certainly applicable to general life as a Jewish person. And because this book is designed for third graders, it's going to speak to things that third graders probably know. On that same token, there are sometimes going to be some pictures or some references in this book that speak to a child who is being raised in an Orthodox home. Things that I would not have learned because I did not grow up Jewish. I did not grow up in a Jewish Orthodox home, certainly. So I would not know that. When we run into that, I'll give you clues from the teacher book and tell you what that thing is that perhaps you know, perhaps you don't know, but we'll give you clues and help you with that. Okay, so when we're looking at page 2, page 3, no, page 2. Which one's this? Page 2, okay. And one thing that you're going to notice, and maybe you already know this about Hebrew, is that we move from this direction to this direction. Unlike English, where we move from left to right, and we start training children as early as 1 and 2 years of age when we sit them in our lap and we point at the words and we turn the pages in that direction. We condition and teach children the correct English way. And a lot of people will say, oh, Hebrew's backwards, Hebrew's the other way, Hebrew's wrong, Hebrew's backwards. No. Hebrew is correct. Hebrew is from right to left. It's not wrong, it's not backwards, it's just different. So English, yes, English is correct. It reads from left to right. It's not wrong, it's not backward, it's just different. Hebrew reads from the right side to the left. Therefore, your book begins at what seems like the back of the book. Okay? And as you turn the pages, you'll move in the book. So sometimes it takes a minute to get acclimated to that. So we're reading always from the right to the left, and a lot of times I will say to you, what is this thing? And you'll tell me what a picture is, and I'll know whether you reverted back to reading it in English, because you'll tell me something from the left-hand side of the paper as the first thing instead of the right-hand side of the paper. And I'll say, do it in Hebrew, okay? So do it in Hebrew means get back on this right side of the paper and start moving across the left, okay? All right, so we're going to look at 3 letters tonight, and by the time we're done these 3 letters, you're going to be able to read a word in Hebrew. And our goal is to read, not necessarily to understand everything we read. We're trying to learn how to pronounce and to say and to speak the letters into words. Some words we will understand and some words we will not. Some words will be just practice sounds put together to train our tongue how to say those sounds, but they won't be actual words. A lot of that will be true tonight, although there will be a couple of words, okay? So the first letter we're going to look at is a letter called Shin. It looks a little bit like a W, but it's not a W at all. So I want you not to let yourself fall into the trap of calling things by their English letter lookalikes. This is a Shin. And Shin always has 3 prongs. This prong is slightly over to the left-hand side, okay? I don't really care if you write your Shin like that. That's handwriting. When we write, we don't always write like in a storybook. We write with our own style, you know. So it's going to come out looking a little different from time to time. In your book, oh my goodness, they've done something like this, something like that, and they've done like this, and it's all fancy italicized, sort of fancy printing. It's just a style of writing. Don't feel compelled that you have to write with a fancy style of writing. Write as neatly as you can, and in the book, it's going to tell you exactly how to start. But let's pretend if the book said to start your letter and go this way and go here, and you decided it's easier to do it like that. I don't care. Do what's best for you. You're the one who's going to write it. You're the one who's going to read it. Okay? The important things sometimes happen in the shape of things or the additive. And this letter Shin has a dot up here. And it's pretty important to notice that the dot is on the right-hand side. This book is designed for 3rd graders. And my book says, don't tell the children this a lot of times. But I teach to adults. And so I will tell you some things that my teacher book says don't tell you because they don't want to confuse you. But I think adults sometimes need to hear why I'm not telling you something, okay? So I'm going to tell you that later, much later, we're going to learn a letter that looks very much like this, but this dot is going to be in a different place. Don't worry about it. Don't get yourself in a bunch over it, okay? Just realize that it is important that this dot be there and that it be over the right-hand limb of this letter, okay? Because there's going to come a time when it's going to be in a different place, and that's going to change the letter. But this letter's name is Shin, and in finding the name of the letter, it gives us an automatic clue as to the sound of the letter. And I've underlined it here. The sound of the word Shin is sh. So the name of the letter is Shin, but the sound of the letter is sh. And that's important, and we'll see why in a few minutes. The second letter that we're going to look at is Beit. And I've drawn 2 shins and 2 baits and 2 of this 3rd letter for a reason, and I'll show you why in just a minute. But this is how the letter actually looks. It doesn't have these circles around it. That's for an accent of something I'm going to show you in a moment. But here's Shin. The next letter is Beit. It looks like bet, but it's pronounced bait. Okay? It's squared off, and it has a tail. And you can see I circled that tail because that tail's pretty important. That tail defines it as not being other letters. So it has a little tail there. When I draw it, I draw across and down and over and back. That's how I do it. There's a dot in the middle. We could say that's its belly button because that's sort of a funny way to make us remember it. But the dot tells us something. Later we'll learn a letter that looks almost exactly the same, but it doesn't have a dot. And it does change the sound of it. So that dot is pretty important. A lot of times I'll call this dot and this dot diacritical marks. I think they're also called nick dots, something like that. What is it? A doggish, yes, I've heard them called doggish, but there's another one that starts with N also. So doggish, diacritical mark, and nick-dot or something like that is another word. Nick-dot, I think, is what it is. But I'm not going to try and spell it for you because I don't know, and it doesn't really matter what the technical name of it is. It matters that when it's there, it needs to be there. And when it's not there, you need to know why. So for tonight, it's always going to be there, and it's going to be there for a long time in our lessons. But there'll come a day when it isn't there. Okay, so this is a bait. And then our third letter, and following our rule, the bait makes a sound of B. Not ba, not bay, just the B sound, B. In the shin, we use the first two letters, but generally, it's just the first letter. Occasionally, we'll find a double letter like in shin, but generally, it's just the first letter. And we want to be careful and clear to say just the sound of the letter, B, rather than any vowel added into it, because when we put the vowel with it, we want that vowel to come shining through. We don't want to mix it up in our pronunciation. Our third letter is a tav, spelled T-A-V. Following our rule, it's going to have a T sound, not a ta sound, not a T sound, just a T sound. And when we put the vowel with it, we're going to get a full sound for it, okay? When I draw a tav, I come across and down, and then I come down the other side, and I put a little foot over here. You see I circled the foot here because the foot is important. Without that foot, you could mistake this for another letter. Without this back stem, you could mistake this for another letter. Without this diacritical mark, you could mistake this for another letter. Without this diacritical mark, you could mistake it for another letter. So I've highlighted those so that you'll remember, and you may want to make a note in your book as well so that you'll remember, because that's pretty important, okay? Now, there's a little trick when we're writing Hebrew that makes it easier to read, because in modern Hebrew today, in Israel, no one generally uses vowels in general everyday communication. They know a vowel is there, and the vowel is there, but they don't write it down. And you say, well, that's ridiculous. Everybody needs vowels. Well, that's because you read English. But I think that if I show you this, you may see that you actually are capable of reading without vowels also. So if I write this letter, and I leave a blank in the middle, this could be cat. It could also be cot. It could also be cut. So it's three different vowels. But if I say to you, the black and white this leapt up on the fence and meowed ferociously at midnight, immediately you're going to know that this is not a cut, and it's not a cot, it is a cat. If I tell you something else in the sentence, entirely unrelated to the animal, and I tell you I took a nap on this, you'll instantly know because you have familiarity with language. You've heard those kinds of words before. If you were as familiar with Hebrew as you are with English, then it would be easier for you to read the things in Hebrew because you would be reading in context. So, in the beginning, we all need vowels. And in this book, written for third graders, and as me as your teacher, I am always going to give you vowels. So don't worry about the vowels, but do realize that if you go on the internet and you look at some Hebrew writing, or you get a newspaper from Israel and you look at it and you think, well, I can't read that. I don't know what that says. That's true. You don't, because you don't have enough familiarity with the letters yet. But as you have more and more familiarity and you learn words, you'll say, well, if that's that vowel, then it might be that word. And that's the beginning of starting to put together knowledge. And everybody that tries to learn any foreign language has to eventually do that. And nobody expects a beginner to be able to do it. Consequently, if I want to put a vowel with my letters, I have to leave some space on the line so that I can see my vowels. Because if I have a vowel and it blends into the lower line of my notebook, I won't be able to see it. Even if I have a different colored ink, it'll still be difficult to see. So one tip is to hang our letters from the top line. So if I'm writing a shin, I can write it like that. That leaves me some space underneath of the shin to put my vowel. If I'm writing a Bates, well, I didn't do that very well. Let's do that again. I can put that right across the top line. And it leaves me some space to put my vowel underneath. And with my Tav, same sort of thing. I can draw it down. And I have some space to put a vowel underneath. Now you say, what vowel are you going to put under there? I'm glad you asked. Thanks, Sam. Didn't you ask about the vowel, Sam? You didn't. Well, you're going to get the answer anyway. So tonight we're going to learn 2 vowels, and that's going to enable us to read at least 2 words in Hebrew. These vowels have names, and your book does not give you a name for them. I'm going to give you the name because when we learn the name, we can spell. I can say, put this letter with this vowel, and by saying it verbally, you're going to know how to write it. Okay? So I will try to teach you the names of the vowels. Sometimes they get a little tongue twistery on your tongue, and we have to work at them a little bit. You will see alternate spellings for the vowels because there's no sure agreement on how to spell them in English letters. So I've given you 2 spellings of this vowel right here. One is P-A-T-A-C-H, patak. Another way to spell it is P-A-T-H-A-C-H, patak. But the sound is patak. And it's a flat line. And for years and years I struggled with trying somehow to remember that that was a patak. And I couldn't do it. I'd have to look it up, and I'd look it up, and I'd look it up, and I couldn't make it stick in my head. But one day it finally occurred to me that a physician that starts with the letter P, like patak does, uses a tongue blade, and they put it on your tongue and they ask you to make the exact sound that patak makes. So a physician puts a tongue blade on my tongue and says, say, ah. And so I was able to finally remember that the patak one was the one that was flat, and it was the one that went on my tongue and made me say, ah. Now the tricky part and why I was struggling to remember that is because this second one, that's called a kamatz, and it can be spelled K-I-M-A-T-Z. It can be spelled K-A-M-A-T-Z. It can be spelled Q-A-M-E-T-Z. Oh my, take your pick. It's okay. But it's pronounced kamatz. A kamatz looks like that same flat line, but there's a little place underneath of it. I encourage you not to call it a T, because it is not an American letter T. It is a kamatz. And a kamatz, I've never found a tricky way to remember kamatz, except that I finally found a way to remember patak, so kamatz is the other one. And kamatz, the reason it's a little confusing is because kamatz, just like patak, says ah. That makes it really easy for us when we're first trying to read, because now we have 2 different vowels, but they say the same thing. They both say ah. And you'll say, well, what difference does it make then? Why do we have 2 that say ah? And I'll tell you, don't worry about it. What we're going to say is that there are differences for the spelling. Certain letters need a certain vowel when you're spelling things correctly. When I want to know how to spell it correctly, I look it up or I get it out of my book because I don't know enough Hebrew to tell you exactly why. Now, if you were a Sabra, and a Sabra is someone who was born in Israel, born to their native tongue of Hebrew, never spoke other languages until they were older, you can hear a difference between ah and ah. But you can't hear a difference in mine because I'm a native English speaker. I'm not a native Hebrew speaker. I speak some other languages, little bits here and there, but I can't distinguish between those two. So I would need someone to tell me, put a patak underneath of it, put a kamatz underneath of it. And if I need it, I'm sure you need it too. So we'll just tell you for right now. We'll just spell it out and do it correctly, okay? All right, so if I'm going to write a vowel, let me get a different color here. If we're going to write a vowel underneath of this shin, we're going to have the SH sound of it, and let's put a patak underneath of it. And now we have a consonant and a vowel sound, and that makes a sound that we can read. So we can say sh, ah, sha. And now we're reading Hebrew. And if we put that same vowel, the patak, underneath of a bait, we get b, ah, ba. So now we have sha, ba. Okay? And if we play that one more time with the tav and we put that same vowel underneath of there, we get ah, ta, sha, ba, ta. And we're reading 3 letters. And that's great to be able to read 3 letters. We could just as easily have put a patak a kamatz. See, I did it wrong. Kamatz underneath of there. It's not a T, remember? I try to make these a little bit bigger than I would normally make them because that way if you're in the back of the room, you can still see the dot underneath. In your book, sometimes it really looks like a dot, but it's a little tiny dangle down line, okay? So the main thing to remember is that you don't want to get a T shape and be calling it a T in your mind because then you're going to be off on the wrong track, all right? So I think that we're almost ready to start reading in our book. We're going to stop the tape and do some practice reading. But let's see if there was something else I was going to tell you. I think not. Just that before our next lesson, I want you to take your book and do the practice pages. It gives very clear directions what you're to do. And when we get, Sam, let me see yours here just for a second. Let's blend some letters together before we actually finish here, because then we have a special treat for you also. But let me just take these off and let's blend a couple of letters together. And Sam, if you'd be willing, could you tell me the letters that are called the cool Hebrew word at the bottom of the page? Can you recognize the names of those letters? And tell me them and I'll write them up here. If you don't recognize them, that's okay. Maybe Gail can help you or your dad can help you. Do you know the name of them?
I know Bet and I know.
Good. Okay, so we have a bet first. All right. Does it have a vowel underneath of it? Does it have a vowel underneath of it?
Yeah.
Is it the flat patak or is it the kamatz?
Flat.
The flat patak, okay. So using our rule, this would say ba, okay? And now our second letter, do you recognize it? Always never fear to go back to your first page that says lesson 1 and look back and see what the name of the letter is.
Tav.
Yes, tav. Okay, so we're going to write a tav. Don't forget its little toe over here, okay? So we have our back slash with the bait and our forward slash with the toe, okay? And does it have a vowel underneath of it? No. So this sound, because it doesn't have a vowel under it, is not going to say ah. It's just going to give us a sharp, clear T sound at the end, okay? So this word is, let's read it together, bat. And when we read in Hebrew, it's very, very helpful. Even though you don't need it yet, you're going to need it. We're going to look out here and see if there are any clues out here for reading the word. So far, I haven't given you any clues that might be out there, but I just want you to look out here. I want you to train your eye to look out here first. Then you're going to go across the top of the letter and see if there are any clues on the top of the letter. There aren't any tonight, but eventually there might be, okay? Then we're going to go down through the letter saying the sound that we've learned that that letter says. So that's the B part. And then we're going to look right here for what is our vowel clue. So now we have ba. Then our eye is going to go up between the letters, looking for any clues. There aren't any there today, but there will be eventually. And again across the top to see if there's any clues on top. There aren't any there today. And down through this letter, which we know is a tav, which makes a t sound. And we're looking to make sure if there's any clues down here. There aren't any. But then we do need to just take a glance over here as well to be sure that there aren't any clues at the end of the word that tell us something else. So this up and down, up and down, up and down pattern is something that we must train our eye to do. In English, we train our eye to go across, but we also train our eye to jump forward and jump back. Let me give you an example of that. This is something almost everyone likes. When we read the word cake, we don't say it's khaki, which is what we would say if we were reading straight across. We would say k-a-k-e, khaki, but we don't. We look at this, we sort of blend that in our heads, we jump forward to see, uh-oh, there's a silent E on the end that's going to tell me to make this be a long letter, and we do it automatically. And so we know to say cake, and then we get some, and we like it. But we do that all the time in English, but we are going across and jumping forward and bouncing back in English, so much so we don't even know we're doing it because we've done it for so long. But if you sit down to read with a kindergartner or a first grader, they can't read a silent E. They don't know how to do that. So they're going to say khaki. So we don't give them words like cake to read at first. We give them words that don't have a silent E, and after we introduce that concept, then we begin to give them words, and we therefore are training their eye. And when they're reading, we say, oh, look ahead, look ahead. Does it have a silent E? Okay, what's that going to do to this vowel? It's a very difficult process. Reading is not a simple thing. And reading in Hebrew is no more simple than reading in English. It's a training. And so we're going to train our eye to go up and down like that, rather than a through or through this way, okay? So, with all that said, we're going to say this word, and we're going to get bat. Bat. And bat is an actual word in Hebrew. I'm a bot. Gail is a bot. Sam, you're not a bot. Tim, you're not a bot. Dale, who's videotaping for us, is not a bot. Never has been, never will be. Because bat means daughter. And you may have heard that word. You may have heard the word bat mitzvah, meaning a girl who is taking a step in her personal commitment to follow God. So you may have heard that word bat mitzvah. I'm going to stop with Hebrew at the moment because my friend Pam is going to come and give you a short lesson in something called pictographic Hebrew, and it is just such the coolest thing in all the world to see her lesson on pictographic Hebrew. And we're going to do a mic transfer here, and she's going to come give you a lesson. It'll be short and it'll be fun.
Short, I don't know. get winded. So
You only have about 15 minutes.
I can do that.
Okay, I knew you could. Thank you.
Okay, the purpose of the pictographs is not to make you fluent in ancient languages and all that. That's not the purpose of it. It's to give you another way to study Hebrew. Okay, so say you have a word that's in front of you, you can actually pick that word apart and get back to its basic meaning. How do you say? How can you do that? That's what I'm here for. If I were to write these letters, this here, does everybody know what that means?
Water.
Water. How do you know?
Convention.
Convention?
Learned that in elementary science.
You learned it in elementary science. You know.
Because I know what the letters stand for on the periodic
You know what the letters stand for. You know exactly what it's going to do, how it's going to react, and exactly. And chemistry is the one language that we have where you can do that. Except Hebrew is also a language. It's the only other language you can do that with. You can actually pull each letter apart. Each letter has its own specific meanings and derive the original meaning of the word. So you can actually take each letter, go back to the origins of the word, look at the pictographs, understand the meaning, and then put it together. So if you were a Bedouin in the desert, traveling through the Sinai, shepherding your flocks, and getting through, running from the Egyptians, you would not need a Webster's dictionary or concordance or anything like that. With every single Hebrew word, you can pick it apart and get back to its original meaning. It's built in. The 22 letters have built-in dictionary and concordance. It's just fascinating. So that's what I'm going to teach you so that you can get back to the origins of the language. So the Hebrew that you're learning right now is not the original Hebrew. Sorry, but it's not. But it's the one that we read right now. I'm going to take you all the way back to Sinai. And the original language came in pictographs. And even some of those pictographs were very similar to some of the hieroglyphics. But they're not hieroglyphs. There are 22 letters in this alphabet that make up words. Hieroglyphs, the Egyptian hieroglyphs, there were well over almost 1,000 letters in the hieroglyphs. And only the high priests, only the Pharaoh himself could read. So what you see on the temple walls, what you see written on tablets, could only be read by a select few because it was very difficult to read. Not everybody understood the language. Amazingly, the very first alphabet that we have shows up in the Sinai, shows up actually in the Nile at the Wadi al-Hol inscription halfway down the Nile in Egypt. So, but you'll see these letters and they look like little pictographs, but they put together, they form our first alphabet that we've ever seen of mankind. And that's one of the greatest advances of mankind. I believe God gave Joseph, because he was very, very wise and was able to calculate and was able to document and was able to build and do all the things that he needed to do. I believe that God gave Joseph the alphabet, and that the Hebrews prospered even then when they were tortured because they were able to read. Each person was able to read, and they were able to multiply and prosper even under the harshest conditions because they had the ability to understand and read. So we're going to go all the way back. So each letter means something, and each letter can have several meanings, and I use it as a study tool. So sometimes you can get an idea of what something means, and sometimes you can't, but you can pull it apart, and it's pretty awesome. So you learned the word Shabbat.
We didn't do the word Shabbat yet, but we did do the letters for Shabbat.
Okay, Okay.
So they'll be able to understand from your letters.
Okay. So the Hebrew word Shabbat in modern Hebrew looks like this. This is called box-style Hebrew. It's about 2,000 years old, but it's not the original. This is modern Hebrew. Even though it's 2,000 years old, it's modern.
For their sake, would you put the vowels that are right here underneath your letters, just so they can see
Okay.
their pronunciation, because that'll help them make sense of that.
Okay, so the Shabbat, and we have the Hatak Patak. There. All right.
Thanks.
Okay, so this, starting here, Shabbat, Shabbat, okay? But what did it look like? What did it look like, let's say, 3,000 years ago or 2,900 years ago at the time of the Exodus? Well, it looked quite different. Sometimes. So the shin looked like that, and it looked
and some Paleo Hebrew or pictographic Hebrew to enjoy and to play around with and to see what nifty cool thing you might learn. There's just one more thing I want to show you, and then our lesson on tape is going to be over and we're going to sit down and practice some of our reading. But for those of you on YouTube, we took some direct pictures of these so that you could see them. This is representative of any good Hebrew English dictionary. I highly recommend that you keep your eye out for a good sale of a good product. You might find the internet is just as helpful to you, but it's often sometimes very helpful to be able to look up a word, and as you gain more and more skill, you'll be able to look up a word and be able to identify it. So this is not to recommend this specific one, it's to recommend getting yourself a Hebrew English dictionary. The other study tool that I picked up somewhere along the way was, this is put out by Zondervan. I've been playing with Hebrew for so many years now, and yet I still am just beginning to understand this little study tool. So it might be something helpful to you, it might not. You might only use the list of the alphabet, and that's all you use from it. If that's helpful to you, you can keep your eye out. Sometimes you'll find some nifty little tool like this. I found lots of nifty little tools over the years, and I'll show you more other times. But this is the final nifty little tool, and this is the reason that I want to learn Hebrew. I hope it's the reason that you want to learn Hebrew, because the only point to me to learn Hebrew is to understand what God's word says in the language that the information was originally given. And all of the Old Testament was originally written in Hebrew. Then it was translated and written in Greek for the things that happened in the New Testament. But if I want to go back and understand, whether it's that I'm going back to the Paleo-pictographic, I have to know the original word. Then I can pick the original word apart. And I can find out that just because somebody was trying to explain it to a different audience, and they chose a different word, and it's come to mean something that this never meant. And this is an interlinear Bible. So it takes the English words that we're familiar with and gives you back the Hebrew words. You can then take the Hebrew words from here as you learn the letters, and you can enter them into the Strong's Concordance on your telephone if you have one of those, or you can put them into the internet, or you can go and get a big Strong's Concordance, or whatever tool you want to use, but you can come back to find the actual original meaning of the word. And it is surprising how often the original meaning of the word has been misconstrued and even lost. And when we get that back, it's like a revelation. And it's a joy to see what the Almighty, the Father of us all, actually meant, rather than what somebody told us that maybe that meant some other time, some other way, whether it was the annotated, or whether it was the authorized, or whether it was the real and the true and the absolutely modern version. If it doesn't go back to the original language that it was written in, it's possible that we have lost something. I don't want to lose something. So on YouTube, it has some close-up pictures of these particular items. Will be other weeks that we'll show you, but feel free to come up and look at these. And that ends our taped lesson for tonight, and we're going to do some practice.